Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the Williams Brothers Caudron Air Racer. It's a 1/32nd scale model kit number 32-460, and it's been released in a number of boxings, and it continues to be put out by the Williams Brothers Company. And these are American-made kits, and they're pretty good quality, actually. You can still find them also, aside from being online, at their site in auction sales and garage sales. Now, the kit features about 40 pieces molded in blue plastic, a clear canopy, and some water slide decals, and instructions in English. There are 4 different versions of the racer that can be finished using the different markers. Now, the Caudron firm was quite advanced. The French firm for aviation, actually one of their planes established the speed record, which had previously been held by Jimmy Doolittle in the 1932 races. And when you're done with this kit, it's about 8 3/4 inches long and 4 1/4 inches wide. Here are the contents of this kit, and we'll be using Model Master liquid cement for the styrene, and some white glue, or what's called crystal clear product, for the canopy. And as you can see, there's a nice decal sheet here for you to use, and a nice instructional drawing to assemble the unit. Now, remember to heed the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when you're using any of the products that you see or hear mentioned in the review. We're going to start by washing the parts. Here are the trees that are air drying to get any resins off of the plastic. As most kits do, this one lends itself to some modular construction. As you can see, here are the cockpit parts that we'll be assembling for that section, and then the wings and stabilizers. They're pretty nicely molded. No issues there. Finally, the parts for the engine and motor, along with the exhaust there, and finally the landing gear parts for both front and aft. Construction starts with the fuselage, and you can gather these parts up here. And then we're going to do a little bit of customizing and detailing work on this model. And the oil coolers, they're molded into the fuselage, so I decided to drill the holes out for realism. Now, this is totally optional, of course. And then I used a 75 size drill and drilled the oil cooler holes through. And then I used some light sandpaper to smooth out the surface there and remove any burrs. We're also going to do a little bit of modifications in order to accommodate and replicate number 6909. And that flyer was used to race in the LA race in 1936. So we're going to open up the retractable landing gear wells in the fuselage. And also you see that those are in the wings as well. So this will not be a air type model only. In flight, we're going to give the landing gears some prominence. So to remove the panels, I use the back of an X-Acto blade, or any hobby knife blade, and this is a number 11 because of its sharpness, but the back side actually makes for a pretty good etcher. And you just draw the blade along the depression of the wheel well there to start this. Using some light pressure, you start with some really fine cuts, and then a little bit more pressure, and continue to etch that line until you get through the plastic to the other side. It takes a little while, but within about 25 strokes of this, you should be able to see that you're going to draw the blade through. So take your time and don't deform the panel. Make sure that you just make a nice straight cut on the wheel wells. Now, I did the same thing for the fuselage halves, and I also removed the air exit below the cowling there for some more realism. So you can see in the white arrows here those locations. And here you can see the pieces removed from the major construction items, and once those have been removed with your etching, use some sand sticks and about a 400 grit paper to sand the openings and smooth those out and give yourself nice crisp lines where the panels came out. Now using a much larger drill, of course, I drilled the exhaust holes out, and that's about a size 53 hobby drill bit. And then again, smooth them out so that you remove any of the flares off of the edges of the surface. In order to add even more realism, I removed the molded in carburetor air scoop from the cowling, and then I opened up the hole there for an opening, and I took a little piece of 1/8 inch styrofoam tubing and an X-Acto blade and cut off a piece there, a flaring to provide the opening for that and scoop for that carb opening. I also decided to modify the pivot tube and replace it with some .06 brass tubing, and I glued the pieces together with some thick super glue. Glue the two wheel wells into the fuselage halves, and I used some liquid cement to just go around the ridge and put that in place. Get out the two pieces of the crankcase and glue the two halves together like you see here, and then the cylinder to the crankcase using some liquid cement. Get the pieces of the seat out and glue the side of the seat to the bottom back using some liquid cement there. Assemble the landing gear by gluing the gear legs to the forks there, and then glue the tire halves together, again using some liquid cement, and then sand off the ridge where the halves go together to give that the appearance of a good smooth round tire. It's time to grab those main wings and glue the wings halves together with the liquid cement, and then place some clamps, some soft clamps around the edges and let that dry overnight so that you've got a good solid joint. Pick the canopy out of the kit, and I always dip that in some future floor polish to give it a thin coating. It makes it look more clear and crisp. Just dip it in some of that in a vat or a tub of that and let it drain off, and then wick off anything from the corners to make sure that you get any excess off of there. Let it set and dry, and it makes for a really nice looking canopy. We'll start on the floorboard now for the canopy, so grab that, and I gave it it's wood, so I gave it a little coat, a couple of light coats of Tester's acrylic wood tone to give it color. Go ahead and paint the engine a flat black color, the crankcase and the cylinder. Getting these pieces together, we're going to paint the sides of the cockpit there, the rear bulkhead seat, and the instrument panel with some acrylic light gray. Locate the propeller and the exhaust stacks, and those are an aluminum color, but I like using alclad paints. So the first thing I did was give those a coating with the alclad gloss black for the base. And while I had the gloss black out for the base coats, I also painted the air tank, the flap mechanism, and the control cylinder with the same gloss base coat. To further detail the cylinders and give them a weathered look, I used a silver pencil and some sandpaper and a paintbrush. And first I rubbed the silver pencil on the sandpaper, and then I gently rubbed the paintbrush in the fine silver dust and brushed that onto the cylinders to give it an appearance of being weathered on its edges. Continued the detailing on the floorboards by brushing some acrylic dark brown over the base coat to simulate a wood grain appearance. Find the rudder and the control stick and paint those two items flat black. Mount the wheels on a toothpick and in the through holes there, and then paint the tires a enamel rubber color. Paint the throttle quadrant with some enamel silver, and then I glued the air tank and the flap control also into the halves of the fuselage in their appropriate locations. Now we get the parts out for the cockpit that we've pre-painted, and go ahead and assemble those using some liquid cement and where it's needed some thick super glue for things like the throttle and small locations. Use some nicely warmed water to remove the decal for the instrument panel, and then apply the instrument panel decal to the base plate. You can see that the fuselage or the cockpit is starting to come together in these shots where we glued the cockpit into the right fuselage half along with the right half of the instrument panel into place. Make sure that that's nicely squared up to receive it on the other side, and you might want to mock the other side there to make sure it's in position. Once that's in place, go ahead and add the other side of the fuselage half to the right side there, and then clamp that together with some small clamps and then let that dry overnight. Next, I painted those parts that were painted with the base coat alclad chrome, and the photographs never seem to show it up as well as it does in natural light to the eye, but here you can see the pieces have been painted, and especially on the exhaust stacks you can pick up the chrome there. Install two of the pushrod tubes there onto the engine using some thick super glue. I used some Caudron white putty to fill in the seam on the fuselage halves after I removed the clamps, and then I sanded the seams down with a light sandpaper, about a 400 or 600 grit, not to deform anything and get a nice smooth surface. Install the prop shaft to the back side of the engine and through the hole opening there, and then glue the engine into the fuselage along the ridges using some liquid cement. Finally, glue the cowl nose onto the fuselage over the engine and prop shaft there. Glue the wings and the stabilizers onto the fuselage using some liquid cement, and make sure you hold those in position until they're squared up and horizontal to the plane to make sure that they're even on each side and in the correct position. Now we'll mask the canopy. Of course, make sure that the future head dried, and then we're going to take I use some of the Tamiya tape. It's pretty flexible, and a sharp razor blade and a toothpick to do this. So you start by applying a piece of tape to the canopy along one of the panel lines, and in this case I used the bottom of the canopy and let the rest of the tape overlap, and then using a toothpick I burnish the tape down on the edges to make sure that it will not let any paint bleed through. And then with a sharp razor blade I just cut the tape along the panel lines and then reburnish those, and continue that until your canopy is covered. Then simply glue the canopy to the fuselage. I used the Micro Products Crystal Clear for this, as it leaves pretty much an invisible glue trace so that it looks very nice once it's dried. I then added some putty, of the putty to fill the seam on the cowl where the nose is, and then after that I sanded the nose with some 400 grit sandpaper and smoothed it out. And then as you can see here, the airframe is ready, and I've got a coat hanger wire there in place in order to hold that for paint. Once you've got it all ready to go, you can spray the entire airframe with some fine primer. I used a light gray here, but any good quality etching primer will work. I had let the primer dry overnight to make sure it was thoroughly dry, and then I painted the entire airframe with some Testors acrylic dark blue. I painted the airframe, the undercarriage doors, the spinner, and the pivot tube, and then I started by cleaning everything with a damp paper towel to make sure there were no dust or debris on it. Then just kind of wipe everything off with a tack rag. Those you can get at the dollar store. And the tack rag, it picks up real small particles, and that should be done just prior to painting. I let that color coat dry overnight, and then once that was done, I sprayed it with some future floor polish, the entire airframe, and then let that dry again overnight. Then I started to apply the decals. Now the decals are pretty nice. As we said, you have a selection here to choose from, and I did this version 6909. So cut those out carefully, as close to the carrier or the decal item as you can, and with minimal carrier. Use plenty of warm water, and then I strongly suggest you use one of the aftermarket products like Microscales, Microset and solvents, to allow the decals to conform well to the body of the plane and cover any crevices, etc. And then go ahead, using plenty of warm water, apply your decals, and then let those dry overnight. Once the decals were in place, I removed the masking from the canopy. To replicate the polished oil cooler areas, I used some what's called bare metal foil aluminum, and I cut that to size and shaped it the way that the panels are shaped. And then I applied those to the oil coolers, and then I burnished it down with a toothpick and made sure that the depressions were kind of filled in so that it looks just like the air cooler area. As shown here with the prop cap inserted, I hand painted the backside of the propeller with some acrylic flat black paint. So grab the landing gear units and the landing gear doors and glue those doors to the gear legs using some thick super glue. Glue each of the exhaust stacks into the holes on the fuselage, and make sure that they are pretty much all pointing in the same direction and are coming out at the same exit angle from the exhaust holes. So carefully, you're going to want to snap the wheels now into the landing gear forks, and they don't really need cement there, because if they snap into the position, they should be able to rotate. So then glue the landing gear into the wings using some thick super glue into the locations provided there. Finally, we can glue the propeller with the spinner onto the engine shaft using some super glue and allow it to continue to rotate. Make sure it doesn't set up, and don't put too much of that on. Well, there you have it. These Williams Brothers kits are really nice, and they commemorate the air racing era of air performance. And if you have a chance, you might want to check out the Williams Brothers kits. This one in particular, no real issues, and with a few of the enhancements that I've shown you here, you can make for an outstanding display piece from the 30s air race era. If I were you, I'd go ahead and buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find us on Facebook and also at our website, rideonreplicas.com. Thanks!